All right, and welcome everyone to the Left Wing Podcast. I'm your host, John Cooper, and TJ got some plastic surgery. No, I'm just kidding. TJ will not be
He's
here
never
with us.
looked better.
DJ will not be here with us today. So we have wonderful recurring guest on the show, Natalie Benzavenga. Natalie, how you doing today?
I'm well. How are you, John?
Doing good, doing good. I know we're just chatting before the show, like working a normal job and doing this. It's
Yeah.
like it obviously it's difficult for time constraint issues, but like just the switching of the brain
Yes.
over. And I know everyone experiences this. You get home at end of the workday, and it probably takes you half an hour before you like are yourself again. But like I get done the workday, I switch into this persona, then I have to become myself. It's a whole other step.
Definitely. And it's not like I go anywhere else. It's like I'm sitting at my desk all day working, and then I was like, oh, it's 6:29. I gotta get on this podcast. So yeah, it's a different world we live in.
I'm telling you, the weather has been a godsend for me because I can go and just work on my laptop outside on the porch if I want, and that at least gives me another location to be doing stuff in. But in the winter months, whoo.
Well, you better enjoy it, because I'm sure Elon Musk is going to try to get everybody to go back into the office, pretty soon.
Oh, yes.
So, King Elon.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see, because I'm telling you, Natalie, I've long been saying, and by the way, everyone, this is our Tuesday Q&A show. TJ did say that we're running late, but it starts at 6:35 technically. So we were actually early, TJ.
For somebody that's not here with us, he sure has a lot to say.
But he has a lot to say in general. If he could shut up, he wouldn't be doing this. None of us would. But this is our Tuesday Q&A show. Feel free to pop in with any questions that you have. We would love to answer them. But I think the main questions will be surrounding economic and we'll say free speech issues are the big topics. But it's just we thought it would be crazy, but the level of craziness is actually far beyond what I anticipated. I thought that we'd be doing a lot of the crazy stuff that doesn't actually matter, and then like building our way up to the economy crashing policies like tariffs. And even when we did them, I thought they'd be shells of what Trump proposed, at least at first. No, he's just going full bore. And stock market's tanking because obviously it is, as every single economist in the world says, that tariffs are very bad for trade and will hurt the U.S. economy. And so, business leaders and just general investors are following suit on that. And the word recession, it's not just being tossed around like if we go into a recession. It's not like, hey, are we in it right now? Kind of hard to say at this current moment, just looking at the data, but we're certainly heading there. How have you been hearing about this from the normies in your life? Like, has this been because I've been getting a lot of normie messages of like, hey, what's going on? This does seem to be really impacting the average American.
People are very freaked out. I get a lot of people in my DMs just saying they don't know what they should do. They're trying to get stock advice, from me. And I'm like, listen, I'm not your financial advisor, but I think we've seen this happen over and over and over again. And we're actually in a state, what I was reading today, called stagflation, where you have it's like both high inflation, and now we're entering into, almost like you said, this potential recession. It's actually like the worst of both scenarios happening at once, which, once again, as a millennial, I'm like, how much more can we take? Seriously, like when is it our turn to breathe? Because ever since, I think since 9/11, for us, our generation, we've just experienced so many unprecedented once in a lifetime events. But I will tell you this, John, people are, from what I'm hearing, they're angry and they're scared and they're frustrated. But to your point, I think they're in a state of shock. Like you said, people didn't think it was going to be this bad. I did. I thought it was going to be this bad because he was more organized and had a hell of a lot more money behind him this time around. And I was bracing for it to be like this. And unfortunately, he hit it right out of the gate that it was going to be, one catastrophe after another. But I cannot believe we are only 7 weeks in, because I don't know where this can even go. We're already down the cliff, in my opinion.
So here's the good news, bad news, right? If you're following along, the good news here is that while there are still many things that were wrong with the Biden economy that Trump inherited, we've talked about them ad nauseum on this show. We
Mhm.
still haven't really addressed the housing crisis that really hasn't actually gone away since 2008.
Right.
There's still massive problems with corporate greed,
Mhm.
and all of the things that we like to discuss here on the left. But in terms of what it was like relative to the normal U.S. economy that us millennials are used to, they're pretty good.
Right.
It was
We're plugging along.
by all stretch of the definition, decently good.
Right.
Good enough that you can just ignore it, like we
Mhm.
have done for quite some time now, right? But the problem is what we are experiencing now is unprecedented
Yeah.
insanity. And I don't want to sound hyperbolic. I want to state that very literally. It's
Mhm.
unprecedented. We've
Right.
never done anything like this before. And I don't even just mean us. I mean, like, any of our peer nations have ever tried anything like this before.
Yeah.
The only contemporary example is Argentina with Milei. And
Mm.
say what you will about his economic policy, but
Mhm.
at least it ostensibly could make sense for an economy which has experienced decades of degradation and
Mhm.
needs some sort of jolt and reset.
Yeah.
And what Trump is doing, as well as Elon, like, they're
Mhm.
championing this sort of economic policy where they're like, we need to fix things. There's going to be short term pain because we've been living above our means and yada, yada, yada. But the thing is, like I just said, it was chugging along.
It was chugging along.
There were improvements that we can
Right.
agree that we
Of
definitely need to
course.
make. But it wasn't, we need to burn it all down and experience
Right.
extreme pain in order to get it good again. I mean, we were the leading economy coming out of COVID.
Well, and also, I think this is all very calculated. I think they want to burn it all down. I do,
Mhm.
because I think they want to swoop in and buy it all back up when it hits rock bottom. So, who's it going to be painful for a little bit for is for the billionaire class. Then they're going to just come in and they're going to win. It's going to be painful for the rest of us, potentially for decades now
Mhm.
to come. And I don't want to sound that doom and gloom, but I just don't see how we continue to survive this unless some drastic action is really going to be taking place very soon. I don't think we can handle 4 years of a Trump economy and think we can bounce back. We were still coming out of the last Trump economy. It was taking us 4 years, and I think too when we're talking about, to your point, things were not great and there were things to improve 1000%. And the reality is, the government is not a business and it shouldn't run like one. And the idea that they're trying to make it that, right, that they want to just cut waste and basically enhance their shareholder profits, that's what they're trying to do to our government. But the reality is, when you're talking about cutting waste and you're cutting Medicaid and Meals on Wheels and FAA, flight controllers and things like that, these are things that keep a society functioning. Weakening water safety regulations. I mean, my God, we need to take a good hard look at why we are so obsessed with this idea that a businessman does it better than
Mhm.
somebody else when it comes to running government efficiently and in turn running the services that we pay for effectively.
It is a crazy idea. I do have, so the good news that I was going to say
Oh,
is
yes.
that
I'm sorry. The good news is.
no, I mean, the good news is that when you look at the economy, like, it's mostly the same, right? Like, it's the
Right.
craziness, the uncertainty, the fact that the president is saying it's going to get worse, the fact that he's implementing policy that economists are like, hey, this is going to make things really bad.
Yeah.
That's what's crashing the stock market right now. It's
Correct.
not like in 2008 where there were
Correct. Yes.
fundamental financial flaws that exploded multiple parts of the system and we had
Mhm.
to do something to recover from that.
Right.
The good news is that's not the case. We just need Trump to stop being crazy. Now, the bad news is we don't think that's going to happen
That's not
anytime soon.
happening.
And unfortunately, we even have Democrats in our comments section right now saying things have got to go down before they come back up. And the reason
Yeah.
I say this man's a Democrat is because he's a sex-having person. So clearly he's not a Republican. No, so it is interesting to me, Natalie, that people bring up that business thing all the time, right? Like that
Yeah.
used to be a thing Republicans said. And I've
Oh, I
noticed
know.
they don't say it as much anymore.
But
Because if you
they're not
look,
saying it, but I think the constituency, like when I go onto Facebook, which is a terrifying place to look for information, but if you really want to see what people are saying, they think that Elon Musk must know something they don't because he's a businessman. Trump is a businessman. That's why he's going to fix this country. There is this real disconnect there for the average person, even if it's not necessarily finding its way into our elected officials' mentality, I think.
yeah, I mean that and to be fair to just like
Yeah.
normal people, like if you don't really pay attention to this and don't really give a shit about it, I can
Mhm.
understand you going like, oh well, he's the richest man in the world. Clearly, he must have some smarts to him,
Right.
which he has some smarts to him in certain aspects. I would say he's an incredibly intelligent con man, one of the
Yeah.
best to ever do it.
Yeah, he's a
But in
fraud.
terms of business intelligence, I mean, even if we are going to go off the argument that government should be run like a business, that is not what is happening right now.
Right.
If you wanted the government to run like a business, I think the most obvious example is cutting the IRS. There is not a business that has ever existed that upon hard times decided to cut the revenue generating segments of their company. That is the opposite of how businesses run.
That's
So
right.
there's not a business alive where stock market's going up, revenue's going up, everything's going up, and they're like, oh, well, we got to downsize now. That's not how businesses tend to work. And if we look at the businesses Elon Musk has run, he's a buy and sell merchant. He hasn't actually built anything himself. He didn't build PayPal. He didn't build Tesla. He didn't build SpaceX. He didn't build Twitter. He bought all of those things. And if you look at where Twitter is now versus where he bought
them all too.
he's kind of destroyed it. We saw it like yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I'm a pretty big football fan. First day of NFL free agency, Twitter goes down. Like that is like to me, that is like
I did hear about this. Yes.
Exactly. Like for football fans, like first day of NFL free agency is like the grinder Super Bowl for CPAC, right? Like everyone's using Twitter during first day of NFL free agency, just like all the Republicans are using Grinder at CPAC. And if you don't believe me on that, ask Grinder. They literally call it their Super Bowl.
That's a literal thing, guys. Yeah.
but like that went down. Tesla stock is cratering. Absolutely cratering.
Beyond.
And I want to make it very, very, very clear to people. Again, if we want to run the government like a business, which I don't think we should do necessarily, but even if we wanted to, Tesla is not valued like a normal business. It is not valued like other car manufacturers. If you look at its market share compared to its competitors, I forget exactly the market share compared to like Ford, but Ford stock price is like $9. Tesla's is like 220. It is valued like a stock, like a tech company. It is valued like a speculative investment. And what that means is if eventually all speculative investments, the fundamentals either catch up or they're a bubble and they pop. And the very interesting thing about this, Natalie, I was doing a lot of digging into this. We don't know exactly how leveraged Elon Musk is on Tesla stock. But if you assume that he hasn't been the most cautious person, which
I think that's a safe assumption.
I think it's a safe assumption, just considering that when he initially offered to buy Twitter, he tried to renege on it and was forced to pony up the capital. So he didn't have like a lot of time to be figuring this out. So if you assume he might have over leveraged his Tesla stock on that, if the Tesla stock goes down to where it was in like 2018, where it was, around $20 or so, he might lose Twitter. And I genuinely think, Natalie, tell me if you think I'm crazy here.
Okay.
If the president's economic policies directly cause the stock market to crash, which causes Elon Musk, the president's #1 advisor, to lose Twitter, the #1 news communication media outlet in the country, it would take Herculean. How the
I think
it would
the
take
Herculean. Sure.
gargantuan. There we go. That's a
Oh,
better one.
as big.
Big, very
It's
big,
bigly.
biggest,
Very big.
bigly levels of cognitive dissonance for people to get through that. Only the people most committed to that cognitive dissonance are going to be able to see that and go, I still think this is a good idea.
Sure.
The average person, that's going to hit them like it's going to be undeniable. And I think that is probably our number one easiest attack at method for this administration. I've been saying this for a while. Elon Musk is a weak, wet suit that can be attacked because he is not actually part of the government, but kind of is. He, unlike Donald Trump, is exposed to a lot of legal liability. He's exposed to a lot of financial liability.
And he has boards to answer to. He has people he has to answer to. He is not a king as much as he would like to pretend he is one. He is not. And, you know, I think this all goes back to the reality that getting a botched penis enlargement really can send people over a cliff. You know, emotionally, mentally, it makes them feel like they need to do something much bigger, I guess, than themselves in order to climb out of that, because this is so closely tied to like the fragile male ego. We're watching it all explode in front of us. What happens when the two most fragile men in the world team up together, and we're seeing the unholy birth of that. And it's awful to experience and to watch. But I think the one thing we can guarantee with these two is that this love affair will not last. They will start to, I think, turn on each other. And Trump is notorious for pitting people against one another. And if he gets this whiff that Elon is a loser, he's going to turn on him. And I think we're already seeing the cracks with Tesla taking such a tumble. To your point, I was on the White House Instagram account today. God forgive me, because it's it looks like something a 12-year-old puts together every day with the captions. But they were getting inside a new Tesla, and Trump was trying it out, and him and Elon are going to go test drive this. It was a literal commercial on the White House page, like a bad one, but a commercial for Tesla. And I thought, this is the beginning of the end, because when this doesn't give Trump the end result that he thinks he deserves, he's going to blame it on Elon, and they're going to start turning on one another. And I truly believe that's the other part of this equation that you're talking about, beyond the financial component and the cognitive dissonance. It's going to become the infighting between these two megalomaniacs.
I have so many things to talk about what you just said, Natalie, because I promised my audience, me and Natalie, while we are friendly, like, we don't rehearse these things, because regular viewers of this show will recognize several things you just said as things me and TJ have brought up many times.
This always happens.
But this is
wavelength.
Why, like, I like when our guests arrive at the same conclusions that we've been saying.
Yeah, it's in the ether.
And it's not like we're getting these marching orders from anyone. We've talked about this a million times. I would like to be getting more marching orders from an organized left-wing media push. We don't. We just kind of independently arrive at these conclusions because we think alike. But before I get to what you said, Natalie, did want to address our comments here, because this is our Q&A show. By the way, if you have any questions for us, like you always do on Thursdays, which isn't our Q&A show, ask us here on Tuesdays.
Keeping you on your toes.
Zeke accused us of being 13 minutes late. Zeke, I hate to break it to you. You were 13 minutes late. I don't know what happened here, but we started on time. You probably were on TJ's clock. But he also says, what if Elon gets knocked out of his current spot as the richest man in the world? That would be awesome. He's going to.
I think he is too. He's losing too many things happening at once. I agree.
His entire net worth is built off the Tesla stock.
Yes.
And Tesla stock was never sustainable. It was always going to crash. He has been operating a Ponzi scheme at the highest levels of, again, human history. I give all the respect to this man. He's maybe the greatest con artist to ever live. But if you just look
Oh,
around,
I give him no respect, but that's okay.
Unless you live, so I give him respect in the sense where I couldn't do it if I tried. Like,
that's because you're a moral, decent human. That's
but
why.
even if I wasn't, I don't know if I'd be as good. Like a lot of immoral people have tried to do what Elon is doing and have failed.
That's
so
true.
Tip my cap on that level. But the thing is, unless you're specifically driving around Southern California,
yeah,
and you look around, you definitely don't see more Teslas on the road than you do Hondas or Fords,
right,
or Toyotas. And yet Tesla is valued. Well, Toyota's a little bit close now because Tesla's been crashing down. But like, if you look at all of the other car manufacturers, their stock price is nowhere near what Tesla's is, and yet they have a hell of a lot more cars on the road. There's a reason for that. It's because the stock is all speculative. It is not based on market fundamentals. And once people stop believing that it's going to just keep going up, they're going to start pulling their money, and it's all going to come crashing down. And whether or not that puts Elon in a particularly dangerous situation financially, I do not know. If he has invested wisely, he will have hedged all of those bets. He will be fine if he's not an idiot. But he won't be the richest person in the world anymore. That is 100% true. And that's why, like, even if you listen to his interviews going into the election and after the election, like, he was saying, like, yeah, no, I needed this. I was in trouble if Trump didn't win. He's very true. But again, he's kind of just kicked the can down the road. I wanted to touch on one thing you said, Natalie, though, which was the masculinity thing.
Yeah.
Because something that I'm trying to push for is the concept of, we used to talk about toxic masculinity, right? We used to talk about toxic masculinity. And while everything we said was true, I'm not sure the branding worked out too well for us, because there was this reactionary pushback to calling masculinity toxic, right?
Yeah.
And while the people who were reactionary about that were incorrect, it worked to some extent. We've seen massive gains for Republicans, for the right, among men, where they were already pretty popular.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. I think fragile masculinity, that word fragile that you said, is that is the term that I've been wanting to replace it with, because what we are seeing on the right, it's no longer even the toxic masculinity of old. It's not some like swole gym bro being a douchebag to you.
Right.
It's some weird, creepy nerd telling the president of a country who was invaded by Russia that he should be more thankful for us, to us. Like that just, no matter who you are, unless you are like in the cult, if you're just like a normal dude who doesn't pay attention, you're like, it's kind of weak, bro. You know, like, it's just not the definition of masculinity that our grandfathers have bestowed on us. And I don't necessarily agree with that definition of masculinity either, but it certainly ain't what we're seeing now. And I think that rebranding it as not toxic, rebranding as fragile is exactly the way to go. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
No, I appreciate that. And isn't it interesting? Because I always find strange bedfellows and things, but you know, we are in a space right now where I believe that men are being really boxed in by this much more increasingly narrow definition of what being a man, right, is supposed to be. And within that, live all of those fragile spaces of masculinity. And then here you have all of these gender expansive people and these trans people and people who are non-binary trying to expand how we look at the feminine and the masculine, which would, of course, help cisgender men, heteronormative men, because they could then expand how they want to be viewed as a man. And instead, you have these fragile, men railing against people that would actually help them express their masculinity in a more varied way. And then they wouldn't be so angry and so wound up and so uptight. And maybe they would get laid because they would be nicer and easier to be around. And I just find it funny that they're basically hurting themselves by increasing the noose around their own necks just because they're terrified of this other group of people that doesn't really impact them at all, but would benefit them. And I always find that really interesting, because you see that with white feminism too. How if white women would just support and stand in sisterhood with women of color and marginalized women, it would help all of them in particular, it would help white women, like the DEI issue that impacts white women more than any other group. But instead, oh no, we're going to stand over here because we're going to cling to this whiteness. It's a very similar dynamic.
So I'm going to agree with everything you just said, mostly right up to the end. Because what you said there was a very left-wing analysis, which is, I think, on a meta level accurate, that they're clinging to whiteness, right? But I don't think that's actually, like, when we're talking about especially masculinity or most of like normal people on the right, while the systems of white supremacist propaganda that they have been raised and consumed in for their whole lives certainly teach them to do that. That's not what like they're thinking.
Well, they don't
when they're
see
doing
it.
these things.
No.
And what they are thinking, I'm going to tell you something here, Natalie, that once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee it.
Oh, I love those.
At the risk of pissing off the most toxic people in the world.
Go for it.
If you look at the online behavior of MAGA Republicans, it is virtually identical to that of Swifties. 100%. If you look at
100% accurate.
It is whatever their Lord and Savior says. The marching orders come from one singular person. Yeah. If that pisses people off, then if they get pissed off at someone, boom, they attack. They just attack constantly. It is vicious. The more vicious the attack, the more brownie points they earn within their community, and the more their stuff gets upvoted in the digital media ecosystem, and the more successful they are. And the group is so large that can be sustainable from within. Yeah. But it creates this very, very toxic behavior. And I say toxic. When I say toxic, I mean, I don't think a lot of these people even enjoy what this has become. But that's the identical behavior. And I find that so interesting because I think that what's going on in their brain a lot of the time isn't clinging on to whiteness. It's rejecting femininity. Because if you were ever like in middle school, if all the girls liked something, like Taylor Swift would be an example for me in middle school, the boys just they couldn't like it. You weren't allowed. If you liked the thing the girls liked, you were a weak man.
I agree. I was saying for women. For women specifically, clinging. I was saying specifically women clinging to whiteness as a white feminist, and they're separating themselves from the sisterhood. Yes, I agree with everything you said. I was using intersectional feminism as a parallel to this idea of expanding what masculinity could look like. And you can't talk about intersectionality without race. But yes, to your point. Yeah.
And that's fair. So I guess to like loop that back around, because I think that a lot of what we see when men hurt themselves, I mean, when by hurt themselves, I mean vote against their interests. It is often that I don't want to be in the group with the girls. Like, I don't want to be seen as I need things marketed to me and me specifically. If it's also, I don't care if it's better, if it's also for the girls, it's not for the men then. And that's how they view. And it's very much a majority opinion analysis. But I wonder, because Republicans aren't for the women. Republicans will say they're for women, but even if you just like look at the data, like they do not brand themselves for women. No. They do not try very hard to attract women. They are clearly attractive. I don't think any Republicans would even argue with me on this one. The aesthetics of the Republican Party, much more masculine. Right. So I don't think that analysis would apply for the white women that you're talking about who do vote Republican. The majority of who
I do think it applies to them though, because it's about proximity to power for white women, right? Because they're still aligning with their race over their gender. And so when we're talking about white men in the center of that power circle, white women are always, conservative white women, are always going to choose their perception of protection over solidarity. And so for them, I do think it actually has to do with identifying with the masculine, because they perceive that as a sense of protection against this unknown thing, where in effect, like we were talking about, they're voting against their own interests, right? They're boxing themselves in because the thing that they're looking to protect themselves from, those predators are in that circle of power, and they're actually aligning themselves with predators, which is why I always find it particularly upsetting when I hear that women voted for Trump, who we know is a known predator, right? And I think it's this sense of proximity to power, which once again aligns with race.
Yeah,
It's very, I mean, it's complex,
it's complex, and
but it's interesting to think about.
It is interesting to think about. It is all interconnected, which is one of the problems that
Correct.
we do have on the left, is that we recognize these interconnections. We like talking
Yeah,
about them.
it's
They're
like herding
interesting to
cats
us.
over here. Like, let's be real.
It's like herding cats, but also it is a complicated message to deliver, which is why I like the things like the fragile masculinity, the weak masculinity. That's an easy message. I don't have you're acting like Swifties. I don't have to explain intersectionality for that to
I love
instantly
that.
get through to a man. You know what I mean? And so like that's, I think, where we need to shift our messaging slightly on the left.
Yeah. But I will say though, that when we're saying you're acting like Swifties, once again, it goes back to this idea that something that's feminine is bad, because we're going back to this idea that, well, young women are most likely Swifties. So it's once again saying, if you're aligning yourself with feminine thought or feminine, even if it's not good, it's still groupthink. It's still, mob-like. I'm not saying it's good, but I still think going back to this idea of putting it back on men, like you were saying, with using the word fragile in front of the word masculine, I think is a very effective way without then disparaging the feminine.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. I really like Taylor
so
Swift.
Am I.
If you scooted this camera a little bit to the left here, you'd see multiple Taylor Swift records hanging up on my wall. When I'm derogatory to Swifties, I don't mean fans of Taylor Swift. I mean the specific online community of hateful people who will attack you if they decide you are a target, which is exactly how MAGA operates. And to your point, it's hard because while you don't want to promote harmful ideology, you also have to meet people where they are.
I know.
And that kind of brings me to the other point, is on the left, I think we need to get better. And when I say we here, I literally am not talking about like people who actually have influence and power for the most part. I'm talking about like all of us. We need to get better at recognizing when someone is trying to talk to people that aren't in our community. Because that's one of the problems I have a lot when I make content specifically for Republicans, Republican men, whatever. The way that I have to, or even just moderates or whoever that I'm trying to talk to, I'm wording it in a way where I'm trying to communicate things to them. And if I do this thing where I check my language, check to make sure every single little thing couldn't be attacked from a leftist perspective, I'm going to lose the forest through the trees. I'm going to lose what makes that message impactful. Because, you're right. When I say you're acting like Swifties, it's igniting that part of their brain where they're like, I'm not a teenage girl. That's a bad thing inherently.
Yeah, and I think
that's who we need to talk to.
No, I know. And I think this is the hard part, which is why, in a way, even though you and I have spent a lot of time now just talking about identity politics, which you can't get away from because we exist because of who we are and we move in the world because of who we are, right? And how we relate to the world. I still think the Democrats, the left, whoever the hell, however we want to frame this side of the aisle, they need to get back to basics when it comes to messaging, like things like the Republicans are taking away your health care. The Republicans are taking away your right to vote. Democrats are raising the wage to $25 an hour. Like back to very much working class policy, working people policy, because from everything that I have been reading around the history of the middle class and how we kind of ended up with sort of this moderate Democrat, this moderate Republican, right? Because I think both of us feel like Kamala and Biden and Clinton, they were all moderate Republicans, really. I mean, that's who they are. Even though they ran as Democrats, it's just we've moved so far right. But you have this middle class of sort of the liberal American that's like, yes, I'm comfortable with that because I'm comfortable as a middle class person. I'm still like, everything's pretty good for me. But now that we're seeing the disparage of equity and inequity, growing, and more of us are falling into the lower middle class, right, which is uncomfortable for a lot of us, a lot of people, and then the working class is growing even more in this way. I think what Bernie Sanders did the other night, where he went and did a town hall and literally was talking to the working class and said, how does it feel to live paycheck to paycheck? And he let people answer, and he repeated their answer. To me, that's the messaging that could pull more people over from the right than even talking about masculinity or femininity or any of that. It's he's taking food out of your mouth, and the Democrats want to put food on your table. And to me, where we are at now, I feel like that could be a much more effective messaging. And that's something any of the Democrats can say without causing too many problems with identity politics, because everyone needs healthcare. Saint Mangione proved that to us, right? That we will unite around that issue. So to me, it's going back to basics.
Yeah, it is. And Zeke has a question for us. Because he agreed with you that he wants to keep it simple, but he also said, I guess as we're trying, but sometimes, how many times you have to repeat this?
I know.
That, hey, Republicans are not for the working class, but they still vote for them. I think there's a couple things going on right now. Things swing in a pendulum,
yes,
but it takes people time to catch up to that.
Correct.
And if I like giving sports analogies here, but it's like, the moment that someone becomes the best athlete in their sport isn't the moment they get recognized as that. They usually have to accomplish multiple things. You could have easily argued that after the three-peat, Michael Jordan was obviously the best basketball player to ever live at that time, but it took still many years after that for that to be the general consensus. It takes time for people to understand things even after they've happened. And so I do think we were kind of going to see a pendulum swing on some of those economic issues, depending on what the Democrats and Republicans did. But I was assuming that we would have a bad economy and we would see a pendulum swing over the course of time. What we're seeing right now is stunning in your face. This is bad. And what Trump and Republicans, and I just differentiate those two, and I apologize because every single congressional Republican is buying into this.
That's right.
Trump is just lying about what's happening.
That's right.
Trump is just saying things are good. Egg prices have always been high. He said today that he keeps repeating this line that tariffs are on foreign countries. He keeps saying this. His press secretary had a press conference today, and a reporter was like, wait, no, but like I've imported stuff and I pay the import.
I saw that, and she didn't have anything. She had nothing to say, and to your point,
she didn't just have nothing to say, Natalie. She attacked him for disrespecting her.
Of course. I can't. I mean, I just can't. But to your point, though, Zeke, have the Democrats been hitting that message home? Because honestly, when I saw a recent interview with Tim Walz, who I love. I'm a fan of Tim Walz. I wish he would run for president, and maybe he will. He literally said, we're not getting back into power until we say we are getting universal health care for everyone. And I think that's the clarity that we need. Not, we're going to expand Obamacare. Screw Obamacare, okay? It's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, right? We need somebody that's going to say, the Democrats are fighting for 25 an hour, not 15. 15 was 15 years ago. We need them to be extremely clear and effectual around those messages. When you had Kamala Harris sit there and someone asked her, what would you do differently from Biden? And she said nothing. That was not the play. The play was to say, while I respect the president and his policies, we are entering a new era. We have new challenges. And here's my 10-point plan, and at the top of it should have been healthcare for all, and right under it should have been an affordable housing plan that was really easy for people to understand. Everything should have been very clearly laid out. We haven't done that message-wise. I think we should be picking 3 things and hitting them home over the next 2 years up into the midterms. And then when the midterms happen, we actually need to follow through, because that's what the Democrats really aren't great at. They can't seem to do anything when they're in power. And yet here we have Trump literally upending the Constitution in 7 weeks. It's embarrassing. And it also makes us look weak.
It makes us look weak. It makes us look unorganized. And what I fear
Yeah.
is that the lesson that Democrats are learning from this is that people want just not Trump. They want to return to the
Oh
status
God, I
quo.
know. If I hear
And
them say
that's,
we have to move right one more time, I'm going to scream. I'm going to scream.
I cannot emphasize enough that that's what we did with Biden. After the first
Yes.
Trump term, we were the establishment Democrats went, the people, what they crave is normalcy. They don't like the craziness of the Trump campaign or the Trump presidency. They want to return to normalcy. We're going to give them old ass milquetoast Joe Biden as normal as can be.
Yep.
And for the most part, I've been critical of Joe Biden on this show many, many, many times over many things.
Yeah.
But if that was the goal, he delivered on that promise. He returned us to basically business as usual.
Yep.
Steady growth in the economy.
Yep.
Everything fairly stable. Some foreign policy mishaps, but Americans don't care about foreign policy. Like as much as
we might. I agree.
As much as the political media does, when it comes to the voting booths, we know that foreign policy is never at the top of people's minds in large numbers. So that's what we got. They nailed that out of the park, just normal, boring, everything as much as possible. And voters rejected the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Because what they didn't understand in 2016 was that they thought they delivered on hope and change from Obama.
That's right.
They thought because Obama personally had a pretty all right approval rating still and was still pretty influential, we want more of that.
Yeah.
But Obama won the presidency off of hope and change.
Change being the operative word.
He promised radical reform coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, and voters latched onto that. He didn't deliver.
No.
He delivered something. He delivered some good things.
Yeah.
But he didn't deliver broad sweeping change.
Right. And I really like what Colby here said too, that he says Republicans are ruthlessly effective when they're in power. They move heaven and earth to get what they want. And Dems kick the can around every time. That is so true. Like we need a real progressive working people's party that is going to be just as hardcore about, reproductive rights as the Republicans are about taking them away. We need somebody that's going to be in a position of power that's going to be this hardcore about a Green New Deal as about the Republicans are, reinstating fossil fuel credits or whatever the hell they're trying to do. Like, I don't see very many people on the left in that position as a firebrand. And the ones that I do, like the AOCs and the Summer Lees, they are continually silenced on the left by those in power, because at the end of the day, the left has become a corporatist party. And so I think the only way out of this is a true cultural revolution, in a sense, where we do have to start finding solidarity across race and gender lines and make it about a class struggle. And I think we're starting to plant those seeds. And, perhaps in some weird way, going back to your original thought, John, around there could be good news here, maybe in some weird way, Trump and Musk being co-presidents, co-wannabe dictators could expedite that process, which maybe otherwise could have taken another 50 to 100 years. Maybe now with the insanity and the true demolishment of our entire society, maybe that's going to be the thing that's going to make people realize, because I'm already seeing it happen a little bit, where they're going to realize, like, I can't get ahead unless I'm standing with these other people, and these other people's struggle is my struggle. And maybe that's what will do this for us.
And what you just described there, while also using the very appropriate phrase "cultural revolution," what you just described there is what is typically known as accelerationism. And I've never been an accelerationist. I don't think it's necessary for that to happen. But you're right; there's a silver lining there. We're in chaos right
Oh,
now.
yeah.
And I could be wrong about this. I've never actually looked this up. I've just heard this a million times that in one of the Chinese languages, the word for chaos and opportunity, it actually might be Japanese, one of the Eastern languages. I'm really butchering this, but the word for chaos and opportunity are the same.
Yeah.
And that's
The
one of those
sentiment
things.
is correct.
Exactly. I realized when I started the sentence, I was like, oh, the language will come to me by the end of the sentence. It did not. So if anyone knows what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. This is our comment show. Definitely ask us questions if you have them. But yeah, there is a lot of opportunity here. Things are going to get bad, and that sucks. It sucks, and we have to pray that they don't get too bad for too many people.
Right.
While at the same time, I actually don't even have to say like hope they're going to be bad enough for people to understand. I'm now 1,000% confident that they're going to get bad enough for like people to revolt against what is going on, because again, it's not going to work. Like there's only so long Trump can say, oh, it's going to get better until it doesn't get better and people start to revolt. And we're already seeing increases in, like people are vandalizing and attacking Tesla stores.
Beautiful.
Which, is something I would never condone.
No. But
if you're going to instigate political violence, inanimate objects are my preferred choice of target. And for as I said earlier, anything that we can legally do to destroy the Tesla stock is one of probably the biggest attacks we can make on Donald Trump.
Hit him where it hurts.
The entire apparatus. That being said, I do want to move on here because, we could talk about the crashing economy all day, but I did want to also talk about the other, what I think is a 5-alarm fire. I think that this is something that we need to be elevating. We need to be pressuring Democrats to make this a battle cry, to which they have been a little bit hesitant to because of all of the opposing dynamics of the situation. But Mahmoud Khalil, and again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I mostly read stuff, so pronunciations aren't always the best for me, but really big story for me, because this is something that I remember. It was in the damn Republican Party platform that they were going to detain and deport college campus pro-Hamas college campus protesters, right? And we know often when the Democrats say pro-Hamas, they mean pro-Palestine, but the Republicans, when they say pro-Hamas, they mean anyone who is pro-Palestine.
Anybody.
And they did not fucking specify illegal immigrants. This is, and they didn't even specify immigrants. And this is a legal U.S. permanent resident with a green card.
Yes.
That is being detained, and the White House today said he didn't commit a crime. They're not charging him with a crime. They are saying that they have the right to detain and deport this legal U.S. resident for simply protesting against their foreign policy decisions. That should terrify the hell out of you. There is a poem, you might have heard of it, that goes a little something like, at first they came for the socialists. And I'm telling you that, like, that is one of my, like, this is a red line. We cannot allow, like, we have to fight against this tooth and nail. We cannot allow any precedent to be set where the United States government is jettisoning people from this country who have committed no crime and have simply spoken out against the administration. That is the most fundamentally anti-free speech stance you could possibly take. And every single Republican who has ever said anything positive about the concept of free speech should be rallying against this. And there needs to be massive pressure on them to do so, because it just cannot be acceptable.
It can't be acceptable because, you know why this can't be acceptable? Because I can't agree with Ann Coulter on something. And I actually agreed with Ann Coulter on this. I mean, you've gone too far when Ann Coulter's like, well, wait a minute. Just because he said some stuff I don't agree with. She's like, I have a whole list of people I'd like to deport, but I can't deport people for just saying things that I don't agree with. And I think, the reality is, in this country, you have the right to be a white nationalist. You have the right to be pro whoever. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to assembly, peaceful protest, and you have the right to due process. All of these things have been completely trampled on. And what really freaked me out about this was because they're being so vague and they're not charging him because they have nothing to charge him with. It's like, okay, when were there other times in history where groups of people were just being held because they were unpopular, or having an unpopular opinion, got you thrown in away somewhere, or, never seen of again? I think that we are on a human rights watch list as a country that's losing civil rights rapidly for a reason. And to me, these kinds of issues, pun intended, trump everything else, because if we don't have the right to free speech, and if we don't have the right to assemble, I don't know what this country represents anymore then, because those to me have always been very much inalienable rights. I don't agree when the Proud Boys march down the street. I don't. That's horrible. It's disgusting. They should all be ashamed of themselves. But if they're not being violent, right? If they're just marching, they have the right to do that in the United States. And I think if we flipped it on its head and started looking at it from that perspective, then all of a sudden the right wouldn't feel so good about Proud Boys disappearing, right? Just because they say horrible, horrific things, which I actually find more dangerous than obviously what was going on in this scenario. But I think you can't have it for one group and not for another. And so if we're going to be singling out very clearly, which is what is happening, a particular group of people that we did not agree with, I'm not saying we didn't agree with it. I'm just saying that they did not agree with. And on top of it, this person is here legally. Whoa, that scares the hell out of me, because they could say that about any of us. And I'll get us even a step further. How do we know who was at these protests? There's no record of, you didn't sign up. I'm signing up to be in the protest. They could just start going into anybody's home and saying, you were at a protest. You're no longer allowed to be here, and kick us out or throw us in a detention center. They're building detention centers for a reason. Like, we need to wake up. This is not an isolated incident. They are testing the waters, and they're testing boundaries, and they want to know, are we going to argue back? Are we going to fight back? And I think no matter how anybody may feel about their opinions or their feelings around what's going on in Gaza, we all have to understand that this is a fundamental infringement and a true violation of our rights as Americans. And that is, to me, the crux of this issue. But they're trying to frame it in a way to continue to pit people against one another.
Yeah. And Colby brings up a good point that he says, don't know if you guys saw it before the broadcast, but the admin is launching investigations to 60 universities for Gaza protests. None of it stops Mahmoud. What do you think the end game is? Natalie just described it very, very brilliantly. Continue, Natalie.
I just have one more thought, because it triggered another, what Colby said. I think the end game is all cultural revolutions come out of students, and they come out of college campuses. And they know that. They know that it's the students, it's always the young people that are at the front lines of the civil rights movements, of women's rights movements, of the LGBTQ community movements. If they can shut that down, there's a good chance they can slow the rate of revolution in this country. And so, to me, this is straight out of the Project 2025 playbook. None of this is surprising, but I think we need to be hyper vigilant and aware of understanding how all of these things are interlocked.
And that's the key there, where it's all interlocked, because we need to stick all of these things together so that they can't wiggle out of it when the cultural revolution pendulum swings back. Because here's the thing. I've been saying Donald Trump is a fascist for a long time now. Clearly, many Americans don't believe me. Many Americans think I was instigating by
Mm,
calling Donald Trump a fascist, that I was being hyperbolic in order to
mm,
attack a political opponent.
mm.
And no, I'm accurately describing his ideology. There's a
100.
difference. I'm not saying it as an insult. Donald Trump, when he calls Joe Biden a communist, he's saying it as an insult. It doesn't mean
Right.
anything to him and Republicans other than that's a
No.
bad person. He's not
Right.
described. No one would agree that Joe Biden is literally trying
Nobody.
to seize the means of
Nobody.
production, right? But the thing is, when I say he's a fascist, I mean that because his
Yes.
ideology is fascism. And a lot of people probably looking at this right now being like, I don't know what the end game is, like Khalil said. Because even if you go to the typical Republican goals that have defined the party for the last 20 years, they were given on a silver platter the opportunity to accomplish so many of them.
Yeah.
They could have slowly but surely, legally and carefully dismantled the entire regulatory apparatus. They could have reshaped the judicial system in this
Yeah.
country. That like they have still right now the opportunity to do all of these things, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not what they're doing. They're
Right.
doing crazy, wild things that are
Mm-hmm.
stopping them from doing that.
Yeah.
And the question, and it's tanking the stock market, which is affecting rich people, which you would think would typically be the target audience of the Republican Party. So who is this
Right.
benefiting? And the answer is it benefits a very small few, an oligarchy, as
Exactly.
Bernie has been saying. And that is exactly what they are trying to do. It's the reason why this is fascism. It's the reason why he's
Right.
attacking he's going first after a weak protest leader
Yes.
who doesn't have the resources to defend himself, who
Right.
already a lot of Democrats did a lot of work to villainize
That's
this
right.
group of people,
That's
and
right.
they are attacking him and hoping that it sets precedent for them to attack more people. And why do they want to do that? Well, the economy isn't going to recover, people. The stock market ain't going to recover. Things are going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. And the
Mm-hmm.
only way they will be able to retain power is through force. And
Yeah.
they need to build up the utilization of that force in order to retain power. This is how every fascist regime ends up operating. It's the reason why you're like, why, if the Nazis just want to take over the world, why did they waste all this time killing the Jews? You know,
Right.
why did they waste time burning books and doing all of this stuff when clearly they could have just used their military power and focus to take over Europe? And the answer is because they need to win on an ideological level through sheer force of will and brute
Yeah.
force. It's
Yeah.
the only way that they can sustain themselves, and they need to constantly escalate. It's why
Yeah.
they didn't start by just killing the Jews.
Right.
They could have, you know, they
Mm-hmm.
could have just
Mm-hmm.
started killing people willy-nilly, but there would have been resistance at that time. No,
Right.
first they started sending unmarked government officials
That's
to
right.
kidnap people in the middle of the
That's
night
right.
and send them to places where their lawyers don't know where they are.
Yep. And it's
Just
about
like Donald Trump just did right now.
that's
That's
right.
where they started. And they
And
actually started well before that.
this is about dehumanization. You have to dehumanize the weakest links first, right? So that's why they're going after, in particular, brown people, whether they're from the south of the border or from other parts of the world. They have to go on. They
Mhm.
have to go towards groups that already are under attack. And you start there, like you said, and then you can keep expanding out because you're dehumanizing group after group after group until you're left with this idea that it's only these people that are worthy of. But meanwhile, those people aren't going to get anything out of this fascist regime either. It's only going to benefit the 1%, which brings us all the way back to the original idea that we were talking about, how identity politics is infused in everything, but we got to go back to basic messaging in order to work our way out of this. It's wild. Look what
Exactly.
we did. It's amazing.
Exactly. Natalie, I have to say, Zeke has been very complicated. You've been blowing Zeke's mind. Zeke DeBeats has very much enjoyed what you've had to say today. And Zeke is a relatively new commentator for us, so I don't know if he's been able to see you before. But if Zeke wants to know where he can find you on other platforms, where should he look?
Yes, I am hopefully causing some good trouble on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the spaces, and I'm now on Substack too. So you can check out my latest Substack. I just did a Substack tonight on looking at COVID from 5 years ago because the group I didn't really touch on, but they always are first to be picked off are, of course, our disabled communities. So I want to make sure that we stand in solidarity with them as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Natalie. Natalie will not be here on Thursday. TJ will be back. We'll be joined by other returning guests, Politic and Lynn.
I
Haven't seen
love
her in a
her.
while. Excited to speak with her. I believe you've been on the show with her a couple
Yes,
times.
she's
So
great.
we will be back on Thursday, 6:30 EST, for our regular live show. Natalie, thank you very much for joining us. See you all later.
Bye, everybody.